played in a row.
I doubt that.
Yeah, you doubt that, sure. But what do you know? So what's new besides the competition?
Over the years, Johnny Carson, who gained notoriety for his iconic tenure on The Tonight Show, showed remarkable charm and humor when interacting with numerous high-profile guests. Not every interaction was amicable, though, despite his famous smile. One guest in particular could get under Carson's skin in a way that no other guest could, despite his reputation for composure under duress. Who was this visitor, and why was their arrival so remarkable? We'll explore the tension dynamics and solve the enigma of the one person that Johnny Carson could never stand today. The controversial marriage. Johnny was married 4 times, but when the details of their personal lives were revealed, there were questions about the second marriage. When Carson hosted the game show Who Do You Trust in 1960, he got to know Joan Copeland, a Pan Am stewardess. Strangely enough, it came out that shortly after their marriages, they both had affairs. She was with Frank Gifford, the sports star. He was with several women. Even though such a marriage was bound to collapse, the couple stayed together for 9 years before finalizing their divorce in 1972. Even more astonishing was that Joan openly expressed her support for Carson and his show, and the two appeared to remain friendly even after the breakup. She would later assist him in his professional endeavors because she saw his potential. His agony. Even though there was blame for both parties in this unhappy marriage, the talk show host was nevertheless devastated when he learned that his wife, Joan, had an affair. Years later, in 2013, though, these memories were finally revealed with the publication of a candid memoir by Henry Bushkin, Carson's former attorney. In search of hard proof, Bushkin writes in the book that they broke into the flat where the affair happened. Bushkin was against the notion because breaking in was forbidden, but ultimately he gave in to his distressed client's persuasiveness. It turns out that there was plenty to be found, and upon learning of this, Carson sobbed bitterly at the unhappy state of his marriage. Never verified. The two found some things inside Joan's second apartment that would have the talk show host inconsolable. There were multiple pictures of the man in question, Frank Gifford, lying around the house, and some intimate items on the couch. Carson decided that this was enough proof, and he and his frequent drinking partner, Ed McMahon, began going on binge drinking. Although Joan and Frank Gifford never got together, the affair was never indeed proven, despite what Johnny perceived as unmistakable proof. Instead, Frank would later wed talk show presenter Kathy Lee Epstein, who would later change her name to Kathy Lee Gifford. Although Kathy asked him playfully about the suspected infidelity on the Today Show, Frank and Kathy married 15 years later. His concise response was, "Maybe, and I couldn't remember." Hopelessness. Bob Hope has frequently appeared on talk shows over the years due to his celebrity status. And as time passed, Carson's annoyance with visitors only got worse. Hope struggled to even comprehend the interview questions as his hearing and vision grew worse. Carson's team set a strict interview framework. The only way to get around this challenge, Johnny had to ask the questions to get Hope to know which response to provide. Carson expressed his frustration with his guest and his sadness at the TV icon's age, stating, "Guys, if I ever end up like that, I want you to shoot me." Carson loved women. Carson had more than one addiction. The talk show presenter was widely recognized for his passion for women, and his marital status didn't stop him from pursuing them. He continued his womanizing methods despite the possibility of losing the divorce settlement. Against the advice of his attorney, he started an affair with Playboy bunny Angel Tompkins while divorcing Joan, to which he only responded, "Screw him." And inflexible following his second divorce, Carson remarried, this time to Joanna Holland, but his adultery persisted. Blank has no conscience. Giving her costly gifts like jewels, an apartment at the Pierre, and a Rolls-Royce Corniche was his effort at atonement for his extramarital escapades. The fact that the marriage ended in divorce and that these presents couldn't make up for his infidelity may not come as a surprise. Mommy issues. Johnny appeared to be struggling in so many aspects of his life: the divorces, the drinking problems, the numerous infidelity. But instead of looking in the mirror and owning up to his mistakes, he pointed the finger directly at someone else. He said that in addition to being icy and cruel, his mother, Ruth, was the root of all his issues. He said simply this about her: "She is the cruelest son of a bee I have ever known," he frequently remarked, with the excuse that she had tampered with his life and that there is no freaking way I could ever impress her. He even managed to hold her responsible for his unsuccessful marriages. "Lady Macbeth is she, the Wicked Witch is dead," was all he said when he declined to attend his mother's burial. His relationship with her never got better. Scandal over sex tapes. Only after passing did some scandals involving the renowned talk show host come to light. 9 years after his death in 2014, an old sex tape with Carson and one of his wives was found. It was believed that the recording was made in the 1970s when Johnny's dark hair was still present. Rather than threatening to sue if the tape was published, the proprietors of the tape declined requests for payment from Carson's estate in exchange for the video's return. They sold it to a private collector to avoid the danger of legal action. Then, instead of releasing the video clip, the collector released stills from the cassette, which were shared online. It's probably good that Carson was already deceased, since the scandal's stress may have been too much for him. Here's all of Johnny. For almost 5 minutes, the vulgar video features Johnny with a lady near a swimming pool entirely nude, demonstrating that the talk show host was endowed with more than just a great sense of humor. Afterward, they spend around 20 minutes doing too spicy for TV activities in the bedroom. Which of Johnny Carson's 4 wives is featured in the video is uncertain. The woman does, however, sport a bouffant hairstyle similar to that of his 3rd wife, model Joanna Holland, whom he wed in 1972. However, as revealed in the autobiographical book Johnny Carson by the host's longtime attorney, Henry Bushkin, the host's life was filled with R-rated incidents due to Carson's history of skirt-chasing shenanigans. Fat shaming. People with different body forms are more regarded today than in the 1960s and 70s, when more prominent people were less likely to be offended. Furthermore, Johnny never allowed his desire to make others laugh to get in the way of telling jokes. When Raymond Burr was a guest on the show, Johnny even directed his foul comedy against him, making fun of his weight in the opening monologue. He appeared in 1968 and 1976, but declined to return because Carson's comments offended him. Missed chances. Apart from his popularity on television, Johnny tried to spread his wealth. He even entertained the idea of investing in real estate. And in 1980, he came dangerously close to buying the Aladdin Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Ultimately, he chose not to proceed, and Wayne Newton subsequently bought the hotel. The TV host took offense at the media's portrayal of Carson as the loser in the scenario, even though the two had never engaged in direct competition. Using his television show to insult the other man, Johnny retaliated in the only way he knew how. He made jokes about Newton's sexual orientation, which may not seem like a big deal now, but at the time it was crucial to have a manly image in the public view. As one might imagine, these jokes would cause a persistent breach between the two men. A jealous streak. Carson was also not fond of other celebrities, even without a specific incident that caused the hatred. He felt that Tom Snyder, the host of The Tomorrow Show, was untalented and uninteresting, and he had it in for him. However, as Snyder went on to host Tomorrow with Tom Snyder and then The Late Late Show with Tom Snyder, it wasn't a widely held viewpoint. One night in the 1970s, Carson publicly slapped the man, demonstrating his contempt for him. After having a few drinks at Chasen's LA restaurant, Johnny gave the other patrons a lengthy tirade on everything he detested about Snyder. Was it motivated by love? Although their disagreement was primarily focused on Rivers receiving her program in the public eye, there were whispers that deeper emotional issues may have caused the breakup. Many people think that as co-hosts, Carson and Rivers go beyond just getting to know each other. Even though Rivers was married to Edgar Rosenberg, she wrote a book later on that claimed the two had an affair. Regardless of the integrity of Carson's story, Rivers acknowledged cheating on Edgar during their marriage. After 22 years of marriage, she requested a divorce from him in 1987. Rosenberg killed himself shortly after, leaving his wife and daughter in shock. Johnny, Joan, and John. In addition to being a massive hit for Carson's career, The Tonight Show helped establish several well-known television personalities. Joan Rivers and John Davidson went on to host talk shows after appearing as the show's guest hosts. According to reports, Johnny was upset by the development and thought it was incredibly disloyal rather than delighted for them. Their shows, competing with his in the TV time slots, was part of the issue. Before it was canceled in 1987, Rivers' show ran for 2 years on Fox, at the same time as The Tonight Show. Although Rivers' program was short-lived, she said in an interview with Larry King Live that it damaged her friendship with Johnny Carson, who never spoke to her again. Joan tells all. Her public comments regarding Johnny's manhood didn't assist the speculations about him and Joan. She told reporters in a 2014 interview that, "I saw it in real life." How did it first end up on the show, in your opinion? Rivers said that she'd seen a sex DVD that Carson had produced, and she was adamant that the woman wasn't his wife. The wife he made it with wasn't his wife when he made it. "Once you're married, you don't wear knee pads," she joked. An inappropriate joke. Johnny was always cracking jokes on the show, but one joke in particular, which wasn't offensive, went on to cause serious consequences. In December 1973, he decided reporting a nationwide toilet paper shortage would be funny. Some viewers didn't see the humor in this and took it seriously, running out to stockpile toilet paper. His viewers' panic buying spread nationwide, turning his joke into reality and forcing manufacturers and retailers to place a ration of toilet paper until the rumors stopped spreading. The shortage that resulted from this prank caused so much chaos that Carson was forced to issue an apology, and the New York Times even commented on the prank, calling it a classic study of how gossip spreads. Unexpected repercussions. One thing no one could have foreseen from this prank gone wrong was one portable toilet company trying to get on the bandwagon. Taking advantage of Carson's popularity, they named one of their toilets "Here's Johnny," the famous phrase that Carson walked on stage to for his show. Carson would not let his catchphrase be used without consent, especially not for this product. He sued the company, claiming he had the rights to the phrase "Here's Johnny." However, it was no easy process with the ensuing court battle for the last 10 years and 2 appeals. The court eventually ruled in Carson's favor, prohibiting the company from using this phrase in their marketing or signs. Despite the ruling, Braxton, the toilet company, is still trying to reclaim the name for their use. The persistent conflict. After some years, the rift persisted, so Newton decided to address it publicly. Johnny Carson is a mean-spirited human being. People deeply hurt him for some reason, and at one point he decided to take all his pain and anger out on me, and I was not going to let him lash out on me anymore, Newton said during an appearance on Larry King Live. Despite his public criticism of the talk show host, the jokes continued, so Newton eventually had to confront Carson in person. "I went to Johnny Carson's studio and threatened the man with violence if he didn't quit with the jokes," Newton said. A favor for Sinatra. In 1981, the legendary Frank Sinatra called upon Carson for a personal favor. He wanted him to host President Reagan's inaugural gala. Carson knew that what he meant was Sinatra would be personally insulted if he refused, so he had no choice but to take on the gig despite his reluctance. To add further complications, Johnny found out after the gala was already underway that the request for him to host had come from Reagan himself, which he would undoubtedly have turned down. In typical Carson fashion, he turned his anger into a joke, quipping, "Ronnie does know that I answered my country's call once already, doesn't he?" referring to the fact that Carson had served in the Navy in World War II. If Johnny's night wasn't bad enough, Dean Martin showed up so drunk that Carson refused to introduce him during the star-studded gala. Not a hope for the future. Filmmaker Peter Jones recalls a dinner with talk show host Johnny Carson, also attended by Gary Shandling and Jerry Seinfeld. Jones remembers Carson commenting on his disappointment in the direction television was going, with its tabloid nature and reality garbage. He said he was sickened by what was happening and was glad he got out when he did. Johnny Carson is unquestionably remembered as the king of late-night television during his time on air and many years after. However, when the legend passed away in 2005, he left believing the future of television was doomed. Little patience for impersonations. To the growing list of people with whom Carson was at odds, we can now add comedian Rich Little. The Canadian-American had made poorly received impressions of the late-night host. According to Little's memoir, these impressions were enough to get him banned from The Tonight Show. Carson seemed content to make fun of other people, but he couldn't handle the same treatment directed at him. Henry Bushkin said that the impressionist brought out the worst in Johnny. Some even connected Johnny's drinking issues to the comedian. Past guests. Throughout The Tonight Show's 30-year run, Johnny interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of guests. Some of these people would be his favorites, others less so. The most notorious of these was the well-known comedian Bob Hope. What exactly was Johnny Carson's beef with Hope? The talk show host claimed he was annoyed that the comedian would not have a genuine conversation, preferring to rely on prepared jokes to get through the interview. Andrew Nichols, a former writer for The Tonight Show, backed up Johnny's assertion, saying there was nothing spontaneous about Hope. He depended on his writers all the time. Johnny was very quick on his feet and was very well read. He wanted to talk to people who were engaged with the real world. Unfortunately, there was nothing to talk to Bob about. For Texas's sake. As much as Johnny Carson wanted to find evidence about his wife, it turned out that he was a philanderer himself. According to Henry Bushkin's most recent memoir, Carson enjoyed being in Texas and was practically looking for reasons to be there. Now we know why. Carson had an affair with a woman he calls Miss Texas that lasted for 8 or 9 years. The Blonde Lady. In 1980, The Tonight Show was shortened from its regular 90-minute format to 60 minutes. Carson claimed this would be good for the show, making it feel more fast-paced. But sadly, it meant that some sketches, including the one featuring the matinee lady, would have to be cut. Model and actress Carol Wayne played the ditzy blonde character, best known as the matinee lady. Wayne even guest appeared on Red Skelton Show as her character. Carol's downfall. The Tonight Show paid tribute to her by keeping the matinee lady character off the air for an entire year, after which actress Teresa Genzel played the role. Many said that none could play the role quite like Carol, but she found herself suddenly without a regular paycheck and struggled to make ends meet. To cope with her stress, the actress turned to drinks and drugs and went on to make questionable decisions in her love life. One of these men was Edward Durston, a car salesman who took her to Mexico in 1985. During the holiday, Carol passed away mysteriously. Her mysterious death. The actress was reportedly in distress after a severe argument with Ed during their vacation in Mexico. 3 days later, her body was discovered floating in the water by a group of local fishermen. The cause of her death was never determined. The water was too shallow for her to have drowned in unless under influence. Ed's behavior following her death was somewhat odd. When Carol's body was discovered, he'd already left the country, reportedly leaving the actress's bags at the airport. Ultimately, it was an employee of the hotel who had to identify the body. Despite the lack of conclusive evidence, many people suspect that this man was involved in the actress's demise. That wasn't only Carol. One reason the rumors about Durston persisted was that he'd been connected to another death. In 1969, Ed Durston was present when Diane Linkletter, the daughter of television star Art Linkletter, fell off a building. Art thought that his daughter was experiencing LSD flashbacks at the time of her death. After her death, he became an outspoken opponent of drug use, even giving up his career to do so. Art had previously opposed his daughter's drug use, recording an anti-drug album to which Diane responded. The album went on to win a Grammy. Diane's history with drugs was well known, and she had previously complained about bad trips, which led many to believe she had committed suicide due to her mental health. Ed Durston was associated with her death because he was the last person to see her alive, even claiming to have tried to stop her from jumping over the balcony. Jack of his jokes. Older viewers may recall that Jack Paar, not Johnny Carson, hosted The Tonight Show from 1957 to 1962. While Carson occasionally ran afoul of the law, Paar was far more controversial as a host. Among his many scandals were an interview with Cuban leader Fidel Castro and the dismissal of Mickey Rooney from the show in the middle of the show because his guest was intoxicated. However, Parr's most well-known controversy stemmed from a joke he made in a pre-recorded segment. During the live broadcast, Parr realized that the censors had removed his offensive joke. This infuriated him. He left in the middle of the broadcast saying, "This is my last night on The Tonight Show. There just has to be a better way of living other than this. Thank you for always being peachy to me." The post-Parr era. Parr's abrupt resignation stunned everyone and wrecked the show. But a month later, he was persuaded to return. Upon his return, he attempted to be expected and continued hosting the program for another 2 years. Still, it was clear that the episode had had a significant impact on him. He said he couldn't handle the pressure of putting on a daily 105-minute show, so he left for good. Some claim he left the late-night show because his previous walkout still haunted him. Parr did go on to host other programs with a less demanding schedule, including several primetime engagements. Whatever the case, his exit made room for Johnny Carson, who would have a lasting impression on the program. Assistance for Bert. Carson publicly supported Bert Parks and others, despite his issues with several other TV celebrities. Parks was a singer and television announcer who gained popularity in the 1960s and 1970s for hosting the Miss America competition. In 1979, his 20-year tenure as the vocalist of There She Is, Miss America, abruptly ended. The show's producers believed he had outgrown the position and that a younger host should take his place. They had no idea that the action would cause a widespread uproar. Johnny Carson also joined the cause, starting his on-air push to restore Parks. Sadly, though, Bert never made a comeback for his admirers. A presidential scandal. Carson was involved in more scandals than just his own. He occasionally succeeded in causing problems for other people as well. In one such well-known controversy, Gary Hart was a presidential candidate in the late 1980s, challenging Michael Dukakis. However, after it was revealed that he had an affair, he ultimately decided to withdraw from the race. Everything became public when the New York Post published a picture of Hart on a boat with Donna Rice. Not only was the picture the source of his public humiliation, but several late-night comedians, notably Johnny Carson, made fun of his affair. Many people think that his frequent insults ultimately destroyed his candidacy. The jokes go on. After all, these comedians joke about current events as part of their trade, so who could blame them? Additionally, occasionally the content is too unique to ignore. Talk about irony. In this case, the boat the two were seen in was named Monkey Business. Isn't it comforting to know that the identity of the next president of the United States could be decided largely by Johnny Carson's joke writers? Asked television reviewer Greg Dawson at the time. Is this a truly remarkable democracy? Jokes about the actions and lives of well-known politicians were nothing new at the time and would remain a significant source of material for late-night comedians. However, their jabs no longer have the same negative outcome. After all, Trump prevailed in the election despite the constant public and private ridicule he endured for his errors. Terminating the mood. The Tonight Show included musical guests in addition to a lot of comedic acts and sketches. Morrissey, a singer-songwriter, appeared on the program in the 1990s as he gained popularity. Carson and the other guests weren't as fond of him as the younger audience was. Why? Well, since nobody paid any attention to these other celebrities that evening. Young audiences that enjoy somber rock music don't seem to be as engaged in the show's comedic elements. Usually one of the most well-liked segments, Johnny's opening monologue, went down like a lead balloon. Even after tailoring his act to the younger audience, Bill Cosby, the evening's comedic guest, couldn't generate laughter. Crude charges. Even if you believe you've heard about Carson's scandals, things will only worsen. Numerous rumors regarding his behavior toward women and whether it constituted sexual harassment persisted throughout his lengthy career. No lawsuits have been filed, therefore they're only rumors, yet this might just be the result of Carson's reputation for having access to many competent attorneys. A few ladies have started to speak up and publicly expose his actions, candidly sharing their unpleasant experiences with the late-night celebrity. Unfortunately, because Carson passed away in 2005, there can be no justice for these ladies. However, it frequently happens that victims are uncomfortable discussing their experiences with surviving victims. Sally's experience. Actress Sally Field had a brief romantic involvement with Carson. She would subsequently disclose the peculiar nature of their relationship. Field made an interesting comparison between herself and Johnny during an interview with Andy Cohen on Watch What Happens Live. The octopus and the reluctant little guppy. Cohen interrupted this to suggest that Johnny had been all hands with the young actress. She continued by saying that she had never been interested in him and that they had only dated because she couldn't refuse his approaches. Her insane justification. It was said that Field had a history of saying no at the time. She became adept at creating bizarre justifications for herself to escape uncomfortable circumstances. In the same Watch What Happens Live interview, she disclosed that she attempted Carson's strategy, saying, "I would tell people I'd lost my mind." Sally clarified, "I told him I was having a breakdown and I was getting sent away to an institution. I just told him I'm very sorry because I had no idea how else to express my lack of interest in him. I must go now. They're taking me to a house." Second choice. It's challenging to believe that Carson wasn't the first choice to host the well-liked show, The Tonight Show, because of his close association with it. Bob Crane, already well-known on radio and television, was approached by producers to take over as host in place of Jack Paar. Crane, who reprised his now-famous role in Hogan's Heroes, made the right choice. However, Crane's good fortune did not continue long, as his life and career were tragically ended in 1978. He was discovered dead from a stabbing in a hotel room, but neither the murder weapon nor the perpetrator have ever been located. For many years, Crane's son thought a former acquaintance of his father was the guilty party. However, a 2016 DNA test disproved this claim. Rewinding to the future. The iconic DeLorean vehicle from the movie Back to the Future is probably well known to you. The vehicle's name is John DeLorean, an engineer and auto executive whose innovation impressed Johnny Carson. Johnny was so amazed that he immediately invested when DeLorean founded his business. DeLorean may have been a brilliant engineer, but he also had flaws, including drug use. A few years after the founding of his company, he was detained for $24 million worth of cocaine trafficking. Surprisingly, he renounced all accusations, claiming the police had trapped him. Carson's company failed, and his reputation was severely damaged, even though he managed to avoid jail time. Maintaining distancing. Every night, Carson's duties as a host included interviewing his guests, but it didn't seem like it was the entirety of his communication with them. He held his distance from his guests before and after the show. In contrast to other hosts of the era, including Dick Cavett, Mick Douglas, and Merv Griffin. There was one antisocial tendency he broke during his many years as a host. To the amazement of his team, Johnny approached Orson Welles just before the broadcast when he was scheduled as a guest on The Tonight Show. He, however, remained aloof, even unpleasant with all the other guests. He would frequently end conversations in the middle of a guest statement if he was uninterested in what they had to say, and would not laugh to be kind. A Little Mysteries. Karnak, who first appeared on The Tonight Show in 1964, was one of the show's many endearing characters. His act called for an answer to enigmatic questions. He was simply described as a mystic from the East. This mysterious demeanor was matched with an appropriately eerie outfit. Karnak would appear behind a curtain, clad in an embroidered turban and cape, while Indian music played. Announcer Ed McMahon would, in the meantime, open the act by saying, "Except for you in your mystical and borderline divine way, nobody knows what these envelopes contain. Only you can respond to the questions without needing to hear them." King of the network. Johnny had the most success hosting The Tonight Show during his tenure. It was the most lucrative TV show in the 1970s, earning network NBC between $50 and $60 million annually. If you convert that to modern currency, you can look at between $180 and $220 million. Because the show was making so much money, network officials needed to ensure the host was satisfied. Thus, Johnny was able to manage the business with almost total autonomy. He reduced the show's duration from 90 minutes to 60 minutes after deciding he needed more time off. He threatened to switch networks when he didn't get his way, which was enough to obtain what he wanted. SNL began with an accident. After Carson's request for a reduced workday was approved, the producers had to devise something to occupy the extra half hour. They came up with a concept of a live variety program, which they debuted on Saturday Night Live. What started as a need became an immediate hit and a victory for comedy fans. The program is still going strong several decades later. Carson stated that the program would benefit from his decision to go to a shorter format in addition to his working hours. They said that since there would be fewer people, the quality of the attendees would be higher, and the one-hour format would feel more lively and fast-paced. Undiscovered episodes. You will not be able to witness the early episodes of The Tonight Show. Due to the high cost of tapes in the early days of television, later episodes were shot over previous ones to save money. From 1962 to 1972, only 33 tapes survived. The remaining tapes were all recorded over a long time ago. Even when they were preserved, Carson didn't believe the recordings from 1973 to 1992 were worthwhile to keep. He even said recycling them into guitar picks would give the network a better investment return. However, since program attendees had their copies, you could occasionally come upon an episode posted online. Missing pilot episode. One may assume that some landmark episodes would have been preserved for future generations, but not even the first episode was considered. It's impossible to watch the pilot episode from October 1st, 1962. The most you can hope for is an audio recording that includes the opening monologue and the renowned Groucho Marx introducing the show. A picture of the two of them shaking hands is also present. The first episode that's currently available dates back to November 1962, when it was still shot in black and white. The first color video, now accessible, dates back to April 1964, when Jake Ehrlich Sr. was the guest. Ed is the one. Despite Carson's importance to the show, announcer Ed McMahon's first encounter with him was largely unmemorable. But before moving on to The Tonight Show in 1962, when their collaboration grew even closer, the two began working together on the ABC daytime quiz show Who Do You Trust? It was a sort of cooperation between the two for about 30 years. Ed hosted the first 15 minutes of every show for the first few years. However, McMahon's spot was gained by his loud laugh and commanding voice, which he used to welcome the host every night with his signature line, "Here's Johnny." The cult status. This catchphrase was frequent on late-night television, but it became legendary in 1980 when the suspenseful movie The Shining came out. It's based on the Stephen King novel and has the now-famous scene where Jack Nicholson yells McMahon's catchphrase while using an axe to knock down a door. It appeared in pop culture elsewhere as well. It was also included in the 1986 album Polka Party and the 1983 film Trading Places. Subsequently is utilized by Johnny Cage in the video game Mortal Kombat, and even served as the title of a song by the Dutch group Hocus Pocus. More recently, it was mentioned in a 2015 episode of Better Call Saul. You never know where it might appear next. His undefined role. Ed McMahon is sometimes called the show's announcer, but never had a designated position. He took on whatever task was needed, giving the impression that he was an all-arounder. He might stand out or equally readily blend in with the background. He was a vital component of the show, regardless of the precise title you wish to give him. He had a lot of responsibilities of his own, including doing commercials, warming up the crowd, and even hosting the opening 15 minutes of the event on the early side. Perhaps most important was his collaboration with Carson, who enabled the host to make jokes without the audience realizing it. McMahon's money woes. Despite his many years of arduous labor, McMahon still had financial difficulties later in life. He was in danger of going into foreclosure in 2008 when it was believed that he owed $644,000 on a $4.8 million mortgage from a Beverly Hills home. Citibank also claimed an additional $180,000 against him at that time. It wasn't a secret, however, since McMahon and his spouse discussed their financial issues on Larry King Live. They desired to dispel certain misunderstandings regarding their circumstances. Contrary to what was said, they did not own millions of cash. Rumor had it that the couple had paid $275,000 for a divorce attorney when they needed assistance for their daughter with a matrimonial matter. Uninvited offers. As McMahon faced his creditors, an unexpected source extended an offer of assistance. With the understanding that McMahon could stay on the property as long as he paid rent, Donald Trump, who was primarily renowned for his real estate ventures then, offered to purchase the mansion. Despite the generous offer, the talk show host declined and ultimately struck a deal with a private broker. Michael Cohen, Trump's special counsel, said, "Mr. Trump does not consider this purchase related to business. He intended just to support an American legend. It would only make Mr. Trump pleased if someone else was prepared to give Ed McMahon the same advantage he was." End of an era. The McMahons' financial difficulties were eventually resolved, but their happiness was short-lived since Ed died less than 10 years later. He had a long history of health issues and had even broken his neck a few years before reaching the age of 86. Although the cause of his death was never disclosed, it's most likely that old age had its say. Other late show hosts honored him with tributes when he finally passed away. There was no way for anybody to remember The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson without Ed McMahon, said Conan O'Brien, host of his show. Ed's laughter served as the soundtrack to that show, he continued. Calling Ed and Johnny the most iconic duo in the history of broadcasting, nothing like that will ever be witnessed again. Reaching novel heights. Hosting a long-running television program requires a commitment since you must appear on screen every night. Carson did not, however, ever take a vacation. The show simply had a guest host for up to a week if he desired a vacation. One such guest host created history when he assumed the role in 1968. Harry Belafonte was the first African-American host of the show and the first talk show host in history. Even though Belafonte's experience was unprecedented, the guest hosts who were less well-known were just as remarkable. Over the years, the Muppets, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. were on the list of stand-ins. Kermit the Frog, Fozzie Bear, and Animal presented The Tonight Show. His jokes lived on. Despite his eventual retirement in 1992, Carson continued to pursue his prior career. As an alternative, he continued to watch the other late-night talk shows and regularly communicated with David Letterman, a former buddy. Creating jokes daily was also difficult to break since Carson would continue producing material he had previously used for his nightly monologue. According to a close friend of Carson, Peter Lassley, Johnny would give Letterman some of these topical bits, and Letterman would frequently include them in his program. Fitting tribute. Despite Carson's 2005 passing, the New York Daily honored the TV icon on his approaching 90th birthday in 2015. They compiled some of Johnny's most well-known quotes, along with ones from other deceased celebrities for their unique feature. Despite his issues, the man offered some advice on how to enjoy life too. If only life were fair, Elvis would still be with us, and all the impersonators would be dead instead. Someone I know gave up smoking, drinking, having sex, and eating expensive meals. Finally, he offered his perspective on politics, saying, "Democracy means that anyone can grow up to be president, and anyone who doesn't grow up can be vice president." He was healthy, but only just before he took his own life. Taking the lead. In 1992, Carson decided to retire, stating that he wanted to end his career while still at the top, even if The Tonight Show's ratings were still high. In addition, he started organizing the lineup for his upcoming performances as he got ready for retirement. Robin Williams and Bette Midler performed at the second-to-last performance. Despite his usual lack of sentimentality, he also imparted some wisdom to his crew, stating that nothing lasts forever and everything good must end. Now, when you're still performing well and at the top of your game is the ideal time to go. It's enough after 30 years. Unplanned performances. There were also a few surprise performances at this penultimate show that would never happen again. She and Johnny broke into the duet "Here's That Rainy Day," just like Bette Midler, one of the guests for the evening being interviewed. The singer also selected "One More for My Baby" and "One More for the Road" as a fitting song for her evening solo performance. She subsequently acknowledged that it was one of the most moving things Midler had ever witnessed. Unfortunately, Bette and Johnny's duet was never broadcast. Following the shoot, the guests, Midler and Robin Williams, performed a song with their host as an encore for the audience. His final gasp. On May 22, 1992, Johnny regretfully concluded his final monologue, which an estimated 50 million people saw. He took center stage, as he'd done every night for nearly 30 years, and addressed both his home audience and those in attendance directly, saying, "I have found something that I have always wanted to do, and I am fortunate to have enjoyed every last bit of it." He also thanked Doc Severinsen, the band leader, and Ed McMahon, his longtime partner on the show. He went on to express his gratitude to all his past and current collaborators and the viewers, saying that without them, none of it would have been possible. The memories remain. Given how long Carson worked in television, it's hardly surprising that many well-known people gave him tributes when he passed away in 2005. Everyone who grew up watching Johnny Carson enjoyed 30 years of going to bed happily, actor Steve Martin recalled fondly. His carefree, mischievous, and boyish manner made the nation a better place to live in, Martin remarked. He loved to laugh, he loved to make people laugh, and he loved entertainers and comedians. Talk show host Jay Leno also paid tribute to late Carson, saying, "Nobody has ever made an impact on television as great as Johnny. He enriched this nation for sure. Without a doubt, Johnny set the standard." Not your friendly neighbor. As you may have observed, Carson was known for making inappropriate jokes. But nothing was more complicated than his decision to make fun of Mr. Rogers. Carson impersonated the beloved character, portraying him as a villain who begged kids to steal money from their parents. The sketch was meant to be humorous, but nobody thought it was funny. When Fred Rogers learned about the mimicry, the typically cordial neighbor was not amused. Discovering his character warped in this way was offensive because his entire life's work had been to inspire kids to be good neighbors and view the world as one big neighborhood. In the end, Johnny apologized for the offense his mimicry had caused and for his actions. The issue with the law. Carson's antagonistic relationship with alcohol persisted in influencing his actions. Although most people who are intoxicated do regrettable and careless acts, this may only happen on rare nights out. If you're a chronic drinker, you run the risk of making poor decisions all the time. Even though it's perhaps the dumbest thing you can do, Carson chose to drive after drinking. He was charged with a misdemeanor in 1982 after being discovered operating his DeLorean while intoxicated. He avoided going to jail, but he still had to go to an alcohol treatment program for drivers and had limitations on how he could use his vehicle. He could not transport other people or pets. He could just drive to and from work. Time for confessions. Although friends, family, and some in the industry were aware of his alcoholism, Carson made an effort to hide his issues from the public. He chose not to do interviews since he knew any journalist would pose probing questions, but ultimately Johnny realized he had a severe problem when his drinking started to affect how he performed his show. When Carson consented to a lengthy interview with 60 Minutes, the world learned about his drinking problem. He also accused TV announcer Ed McMahon of being involved in his drinking sessions, saying, "Oh, Ed and I have had some wonderful times in the past." Although these nights may have seemed wonderful at the time, he made some inappropriate jokes while under the influence that were highly offensive to others and would come back to haunt him. He acknowledged on the show that he did not behave well when intoxicated, saying, "I don't handle alcohol well at all. No, I don't." Drinking problems in the family. Since it's difficult to keep secrets in show business, it was well known that Carson struggled with alcohol. Unfortunately for those around him, his bad behavior would only get worse. This was made especially clear in October 1987 when the show celebrated its 25th anniversary, and NBC hosted a lavish party themed around the Queen Mary. Rick, Carson's son, was invited, and since he was also somewhat of an alcoholic, Rick became very drunk at the party, which infuriated his well-known father. Carson lost his cool and started yelling at his son in front of friends, family, celebrities, and television executives. Rick had to be separated from Carson before Carson could physically attack him. Know better as a father. Given his dark side, you might be surprised to hear that Carson was a father. He had 3 children with his first wife, Jody Walcott, though he never had any more from subsequent marriages. Rick, his son, suffered from mental illnesses, and Johnny, understandingly, did not support him. In fact, he refused to visit his son while he was in an institution. Carson may have regretted this lack of support when Rick's life was tragically cut short on June 21, 1991, when the young man lost control of his car, skidding off a 125-foot cliff and dying instantly. Carson honored his son as well as his photographic endeavors in an episode of his show. The honeymoon is over. It's easy to see a television personality night after night and feel that you have a true sense of what kind of person they are. For his viewers, Johnny Carson was simply captivating and funny, a man who could charm and entertain millions. While this might have been true in one sense, his off-screen persona was very different, with many describing him as cruel, particularly his 4th wife Alexis Moss. He had to keep up his charming side long enough for her to fall in love and marry him, but things went downhill quickly after the wedding. It was on their yachting honeymoon through Italy in 1987 that she saw his true colors. What should have been a wonderful experience was ruined by his unpleasant moods. They began to argue, which is typical for any couple, but other people on their yacht heard Johnny come back at Alexis with a particularly cutting remark. "We've only been married for 3 weeks. If I hear you saying something like that again, don't expect this marriage to last another 3. If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon